Okay, Tov, today's daf is daf Chaf Beis. And we're up to Otzitz, which is on the second line from the top. Otzitz shel echad, uzroim shel acher. So Ruvain owns the flower pot, or the pot that's holding on to Zroim, and Shimon owns the Zroim. We have like a shutfis here. Mochar bal otzitz lebal Zroim, and the owner of the otzitz sells the otzitz, he sells the pot itself, lebal azroim. Now, the status of the otzitz is tolush, and therefore it is metaltalin, and metaltalin are subject to a kinyan meshicha. So therefore, kevan shemoshach, when the Baal Azroim makes a meshicha on the otzitz, it becomes his. And there's a long discussion here in Tosfos about what would be if the otzitz and the Zroim were both owned by one person, and he sold the Zroim to somebody else. And the point is that the kinyan of Mashiach is not operative with regard to the Zroim. The otzitz has a din of tolush, and therefore metaltal. The Zroim, on the other hand, are mechubar, and Mashiach would not be meaningful. But now the Gemara flips it around. Mochar bal azroim lebala otzitz. What if the owner of the Zroim wants to sell his Zroim to the owner of the pot? Now, if the Baal HaOtzitz did not pay Mos, so therefore what kinyan could he make on the Zroim? Lo kana achi yachzik b'Zroim. The Zroim, as we said before, have the status of mechubar, not tolush, and therefore karka, and not metaltalin, and therefore they require chazaka and not meshicha. Now, otzitz v'Zroim shel echad u'mochran li'acher. If he's selling both the otzitz and the Zroim, then you and I would have thought that once he wants to acquire ownership on both the otzitz and the Zroim, he's going to need a mashiach on the otzitz and a chazaka on the Zroim. And the Gemara says no. Hichzik b'Zroim Hana otzitz. Now, this is what we call a kinyan agav, which means that, as we'll see, the Gemara is going to quote the Mishnah Kiddushin, that you could be makne metaltalin agav karka. And therefore, when the Koneh makes a kinyan chazak on the Zroim, and the Zroim we said has the status of karka, but Mela, since it was a das makne on the otzitz as well, the otzitz has the status of metaltalin, then we have what's called a kinyan agav. So if you sell metaltalin together with karka, once lokech, I should say, makes a kinyan chazak on the karka, but mela agav, he's kohen the metaltalin together with it. And the Gemara derives this from a pasuk in Divrei Yomim, Vayitem lahem avia matanos rabos lekesav ulazol magnanos im ori mitzuros b'Yehuda. So the ori mitzuros are karka, and the matanos rabos kesav and zov are metaltalin. Once the lokech makes a kinyan on the karka, memela he's koneh the metaltalin. That's called agav. V'zoi sheshaninu, the Mishnah in Kiddushin Daf Chavav Nechasim Shein Lam Achrayis, which is called metaltalin, Niknim im nechosim sheish lamachrayis, which means karka, bekesef ubeshtar b'chazok. Any of the three kinyonim that operate in karka. However, the Gemara concludes its presentation by telling us in the opposite scenario, where let's say the Lokeach made a kinyan on the otzitz, which means he did only a kinyan mashicha on the metaltalin, afes ha'otzitz lo kon, ad yachzik bizroyim. He's going to need a kinyan on this roim, because there's no kinyan agav, karka agav metaltal, and it only works in the other direction. So if he made a chazaka on the otzitz, and we said that the otzitz is metaltalin, and metaltalin are not niknim be chazaka, he didn't make a kinyan that was valid on the otzitz, and therefore afis otzitz lo kana, and certainly even had he made a mashicha on the otzitz instead of a chazak, which would be valid for the otzitz, he would not be kona the zroim, because there's no kinyan aga from metaltalin to karka. Okay, now we get into zroim. Now, we know that mitzvahs hatliyas baretz, like Trumas and Maasros, depend upon the karka of Eretz Yisrael. What happens if you could have growth that grew both in Eretz Yisrael and in Chutz La'aretz? The same tvua or peros grew from both Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz. And the only way you could imagine such a scenario is with an otzitz. So you have an otzitz that's situated on the gvul, half on Eretz Yisrael and half on Chutz La'aretz. Now, you and I would have said, logically, that we'll look at the peros that are growing, the zraim that are growing in the otzitz, and we'll see that on the right side, they're growing from Chutz La'aretz. On the left side, they're growing from Eretz Yisrael. So those on the right side would be potem from Trumas Maasros. Those on the left would be chayim in Trumas Maasros. But the Gemara says the following: Nikvo ba'oretz v'nofo b'chutz la'aretz. We said that we're talking about a perforated flower pot, and that which grows inside the pot nourishes itself from the nutrients from the Adama through the holes. In this particular scenario, the holes are located within the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael. However, these Roim will turn their foliage, so to speak, their branches and their leaves towards Chutz La'aretz. So on the one hand, you have Yanika from Eretz Yisrael. On the other hand, you have a makom of Chutz La'aretz. Abaye Amar, according to Abaye, Bosa Nikva is Linan. We don't care about the makom, but rather about the nekev, because the nekev represents Yanika. And therefore, since in this particular scenario, the nekev is on top of the karka of Eretz Yisrael, the gidul of the zraim in the otzitz is facilitated by sucking up the nutrients, the yanika, from Eretz Yisrael, and therefore there's a chiyuv Trumas and Maasros. Rava says no. Forget about the makom nekev, which is really the shrosha, the shroshim, but let's look at the nof, meaning the makom. Where is it that these Roim are located? They are located as they grow in Chutz La'aretz. And therefore, Rava paskins against Abaye that we consider these Roim as if they grew in Chutz La'aretz and they're part of Trumas and Maasros. But the Gemara now limits the scope of this machlokas. And the Gemara is going to tell us that in one particular scenario, even Rava agrees that there's a status of Peros Eretz Yisrael to these Roim. And that's going to be the case of the Ashrush. That what happens is that the roots are not in the ground and only in the ground, but somehow the roots go through the Nekev, and therefore, Kuliyamalo Pligi, even Rava concedes that in this case, the status of the Zroim is that of Gadol B'Eretz Yisrael, it's Mechubal Aretz. So that the Shroshim connect the Karka to the Nof, to the leaves and the Zroim that grow in this Nekev, even according to Rav. And he's chayav in Trumas and Maisros. So where is the machlokes between Abai and Rav ki pligi below Ashrush? In other words, the Shroshim are deep, submerged below ground level in the Karka of Eretz Yisrael. Abai says that the Makom Nekev, which is directly above the Shroshim, will allow the Zroim to suck up the Yanika from the Karka, even though the Shroshim haven't broken through the Nekev. And Rava says no, since the Shroshim are not inside the Otzitz, we view the Otzitz as a separate entity, and the Gidol of Eretz Yisrael depends upon the Makom Anof. And the Gemara now asks the following question. Ubida Ashrush lo pligi. Is it really true that everybody would agree? It's a unanimous view that we don't go basar nof, even according to Rava, in a case of Bida Ashrish. But nan, we have a mission in Bab Metzia Kuf Yud Ches. Shtei ganos zu al gavzu. Okay. So now we get into a bit of a complicated sugya. I was hoping to have here what's called a Pirush Chai. In the Masechet, there are no pictures here. So we'll try to do the best we can to vision what's going on over here. You've got two gardens that are owned by two separate people, but yet they're not on the same ground level. One is higher and the other is lower. And immediately in between the two ginos, you have a yerek bein tayim. There's a vegetable that is growing. And if I get the picture correctly, it's the yerek actually is sucking the yanika from the higher gino, what we call the elyona, or the elyon. But the zraim are, which means the leaves and all of the foliage turns over, bends onto the avir of the tachtona. And once again, we would apparently go back to our original machlokas Shinabai v'Rava. Do we go basa yanika or basa the makom gidu? As to which one of these two Bali Agina owns the yerek. And here we have a machlokas tanoim in the Mishnah Bab Metzia, when the yanika is from the karka of the gin elyona, and the nof is nota into the aver the gina tachtona. Rabbi Meir omer shel elyon. Rabbi Meir seems to assume that we go basa yanika. And here we have real shroshim. And Rabbi Yehuda omer shel tachton. For some strange reason, Rabbi Yehuda says that we don't consider the yanika, but rather everything depends upon the makom anof, which means that even in the case of hashrasha, we have a reflection of the shita of Rava against Abaye, or in this case against Rabbi Meir, that Azlinin Basar Makom Anov. And the Gemara answers, Hasam Kidikatani Taima. If we read the end of that Mishnah, we'll get an insight into the reasoning behind this machlokes between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. On Rabbi Meir says to Rabbi Yehuda, "My im yirtzeh ha'elyon litol es afara is ein kan yerek." The owner of the elyon could depress. I'm going to use that word. He could depress his offer and equalize his gina to the level of the tachton. And if he does so, then ein kan yerek. The yerek is going to perish. So therefore, he has the power, the elyon, to potentially destroy the yerek without violating any, well, maybe violates Baltashkis, I don't know, but without violating any monetary rights, because he's just simply going to suppress his offer, which he can do. Rabbi Yehuda responds, well, by the same token that the elyon could depress his karka, the tachton could do a landfill and raise the level of his karka, and again destroy the yerek. Rabbi Yehuda, ma'im yirtzeh tachton lemalos eski noso ofar, and therefore raise the level of the tachton to the elyon, and ein kan yerek. So there's a tug of war here between the elyon and the tachton, between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, representing respectively each one of these two, about each one could really destroy the yerek, and it's within his legal rights to do so. So who wins in this tug of war? And apparently, the machlokas is, to whom do we give what's called adifus of bailus mamonis ala yerek? Who really owns this yerek? Should we say the Baal Elyon owns the yerek because he can take away his offer and submerge, so to speak, his gina to the point in which the yerek is gone? Or should we say that the Baal Gina Tachtona, who can do a landfill and raise up his level and therefore destroy the yerek? So the Gemara's answer is, this is a machlokas in Dinei Bailus. In Mammon, this is a Choshe Mishpat issue. This has nothing to do with mitzvahs hatliyas ba'aretz and zroim of trumas and maasros. It's very possible that Rabbi Yehuda would be modeh, that like Rava, the ikar makom yenika is the makom anof, where is the nekev, or adrabah, where the nekev is, that's the yenika. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda would say that if we go basar the yenika, which is the makom hanekev, then in the shtei ginos, as far as maasros is concerned, then the makom hayenika is the karka elyona, because that's where the shroshim are. And Rabbi Yehuda would be modeh, therefore, that he's chayiv trumas and maasros, even though he owns the tachton. Now the Gemara asks another kasha. Vakate b'de asher lo pligi. Even though you deflected my kasha from the Mishnah in Bava Metzia, nevertheless, I'm going to prove to you that even in the case of a shrishu azron b'karka Eretz Yisrael, nevertheless, we're going to have a machlokas. But Tanya, we have a brisa Elon. Now you have a tree that's on the border between Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz. Miktsaso ba'aretz, or miktsaso b'chutz la'aretz. So what's the status of the peros that grow from this tree that's situated half in Eretz Yisrael, half in Chutz La'aretz? And now we start with the sheet of Rebbe. Hevel v'chulin muravim zebazeh. The yenika of every pri, according to Rebbe's logic, is coming at the same time from both the karka of Eretz Yisrael, and that would make it tevel l'trumas of maisrus, and from the karka of chutz la'aretz, which would make it potter from trumas of maisrus. So we have now a combination of tevel and chulin. Rav Shimon Gamliel disagrees. Hagadol b'chiv chayv, hagadol b'ptur potter. Let's look and see where the peros are growing from. It all depends upon the avir. Those peros that can be found in the avir of Eretz Yisrael are chayav in trumas hamaisus. Those that are found in the avir of chutz la'aretz are potter from trumas hamaisus. And the Gemara analyzes this. My love, shouldn't we assume that mikzas nofo ba'aretz or mikzas nofo b'chutz la'aretz? The scenario in the Brisa is where the shroshim of the Elon are either in Eretz Yisrael or in Chutz La'aretz, whereas the Nof is partially in Eretz Yisrael and partially in Chutz La'aretz. So even though the shroshim are totally in Eretz Yisrael, again, it could be the other way around, but they might be in Eretz Yisrael, and nevertheless, both Rebbe and Reb Shimon Gamliel would say that we don't go basar, the hashrosh in the karka, but rather makom nof. Whereas Abai said that we always go basar, the hashrosha, and not basar, the makom nof. So this is a kash on Abai. Lo, the Gemara deflects. Mix hashroshim ba'aretz and mix hashroshim b'chutz. Not the way you assume that the shroshim are all totally either in Eretz Yisrael or in chutz, but part of the shroshim are in, and part of the shroshim are here. So therefore, the peiros are yonek both from karka Eretz Yisrael and from karka chutz. And here we have machlokes Rebbe and Reb Shimon Gamliel. My time to Reb Shimon Gamliel. Why does Reb Shimon Gamliel say that we split it? And the peros of chutz la'aretz are potter in a meiser. After all, the shroshim on one side of the Elon will give a sraf into the peros on the other side of the Elon, and therefore the unique of the peros is from both karka Eretz Yisrael and chutz la'aretz. So how can he tell me that half of the peros are potter? And this is a special question on Abaye, who says that it all depends upon the makom hanekev, which means the yanika, and the Gemara answers the mafsik tsunma. There's a boulder that separates between the shroshim in Eretz Yisrael and the shroshim in chutz la'aretz, and that makes it into two different sets of shroshim. There's what's called the geza ha'ilon, which is all the way on the bottom, and the shroshim that come out of this geza split into two with a hefsek of a tzunma in the middle. So therefore, the part that grows in Eretz Yisrael does not have a unika from the shroshim of chutz la'aretz, and vice versa. Those pears that grow in chutz la'aretz have no unika from the shroshim in Eretz Yisrael because the unika is separated by this boulder. So every part stands on its own. My time of the Rebbe. Why is Rebbe ignoring the tzunma that l'chorah separates the shroshim into two? And again, all this is difficult according to Abaye, who says that everything depends on the makom hanekev, which means the shroshim and the yanika. And the Gemara answers that Rebbe Shita, again, you have to know more about botany here, the hadre arve, that even though subterranean, there's a hefsek through this tzunma between these shroshim and those shroshim, but when we go a little bit higher, there's going to be a mixture. And in terms of the anika of the shroshim, there's mu'uravim, there's going to be a taroves in the Elon itself. And therefore, each pri has a taroves, according to Rebbe, of tevel and chulin. The Maika Miflagi, Marsav, according to Rebbe Avira Mevalbel. Even though in the Shroshim there's a separation between the Shroshim of Eretz Yisrael and the Shroshim of Chutz La'aretz, nevertheless, above that level of the shroshim, where they see the pnei ha'avir, so the fruits from this side and from that side are connected through the avir, and they mix up together. There's no avdolah. And Rabbi Gamliel Savar, Hai L'chudeikoi v'Hai L'chudeikoi, that once there's a tzudma that separates the shroshim, then we don't assume that the avir is mevalbel u'ma'arbev esa yanikos. There are two separate yanikos, one from Eretz Yisrael and one from Chutz. Okay, now we come back we land from Zerayim back to Noshim, back to Gittin. The Mishnah says in the name of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira that we don't write a get on Nir Mochuk. Okay, Nir Mochuk, we understand that there was some erasure, and once you play with erasing things, then you could erase even a Tanai in the get. But what about diphthera? What exactly is diphthera? Okay, so I had a lot of trouble with this, and someone was kind enough to send me an English translation. Amar Rab Chia bar Asi Mishmei De'ula Gimel Oros Hain. There are three types of hides. Now, klaf is not going to be mentioned here because that's not called oros. That's fully developed. It's no longer a hide, but rather it's called a parchment. And in the Mishnah in Shabbos, Adav Tzadiches, the case of klaf, in terms of how large of a klaf you'd be chayef ha'otzah, the shear of klaf, is mentioned explicitly. Rab Chia is going to add oros. What is the shear of oros? The minimum size of oros for the chi of hotzah mirshus l'shus. What are these three categories of hides? Matzah, sounds like we're learning Hilchas Pesach here. Chefa, the diphthera. Matzah kimashmo. Matzah means that the treatment of the hide, which is a threefold treatment, has not even begun. It's really at the most basic stage of a hide without any processing whatsoever. Which means, what are the three stages of processing to make the or into a klaf? And matzah has none of them. Delo maliach, delo kamiach, delo apitz. Okay, this was all Chinese to me. And he says the following. It has been treated neither with salt, nor with flour, nor with gallnut. Parchment is treated in three stages, with salt, with flour, and with gallnut. But matzah is a hide that's completely untreated. And we call it a matzah, like a simple wafer that hasn't yet leavened. Now, why is it necessary for a b'chia to teach me that there are three different categories of oros? What is the minimum chiyuv in carrying hides from one rishus to the other? You're not chayiv on Shabbos unless you bring out something, you carry something that has a function to it. And the question is, if you haven't yet created a parchment, you're only in these early stages, and you're going through maliach, kamiach, and ofitz, through salt, flour, and gallnut, at what point do you have what shear? In other words, how does it function? Kama shi'uro, kiriktani Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda. And now we're talking about matzah. Kidei lotzur mishkal ktana. They had a small weight. It was probably made out of lead. And lead tends to wear out with the passage of time and usage. And that's not good. If you want to weigh something, you need a precise weight. So you want to protect this weight and cover it with something like a hide. And even the simplest hide, which has not yet been processed, which is called matzah, is enough to cover a small weight. Vekama, how much would cover a small weight when you want to cover it with this R? Amar Abaye, just 1 second. The next word is a little smudged out here. Ki riva de riva. A quarter of a quarter de pumpedisa, of the smallest weight of pumpedisa, which is the smallest weight of pumpedisa. Chayfa, what's chayfa? The moliach v'lo kamiach v'lo ofitz. So it's salted. We passed the first stage of treatment, but we didn't get to the stage of flour or golna. L'may hilchas alotza Shabbos. The kamashiro. What's the shear in hotzah of chayfa? Kedisnan or kedei lasos kmiyah. It says, he says the following: Kevan shemesukan ktsas roy lechasos vilatov bo kmin. Okay, all of Hotzah Shabbos has to do with kmiyim. You know, they used to wear kmiyah, an amulet, it's called in English. So there's a leather covering over the amulet, and even if you've only reached the level of chayfa, which means kamiach, which means moliach, that's sufficient of toughening this hide in such a way that it's roy lachasos kamiach. Diftera, the moliach v'kamiach. So now we got to the second stage, in which it was not only treated with salt, but also with flour. My hilchasa, once again, Lotzah Shabbos u'maish kamashi uro kidei lichtov olav es haget. The diphthera is large enough to write a get on it. We're not going to get into klaf. That's the Mishnah there in Shabbos. But in any event, now, unfortunately, the footnote here did not come out. Let's see in the Hebrew if he adds anything here. Right, we saw in our Mishnah that the Chachamim are machshir get al diftera. So giftera is kosher get. And Rashi, he quotes in Masechet Shabbos, is of the opinion that the shear is kedei lotzur mishkal ktana. V'hu ashir agadol shebeshiurim. Shear kedei lasos kmiu shear katan mimenu. Shear kedei lichtov esaget hu shear katan mikulon. Just 1 second. I know. Let's see if he explains it. The b'diftera sheroy lichtov olaf esaget dai b'shir katan. Kedei lichtov esaget. Al kamiyah she'eno roy lichtov olav haget sarich shir gadol yoser kedei lasos kamiyah. Umatzah she'eno roy lichtov bo kamiyah sarich shir gadol yoser kedei lotzer bo mishkal katan. Okay, this gigantic machlokas rishonim, but Rashi's shita is that in terms of the hierarchy of shiurim and how much of a kamus you have to be motzi in order to be chayav, then diftera is lechumra, it's the shir katan, and then we go up one level to chayfa, which is the shir yoser gadol, until we go to the largest shir, which is in the case of matzah. Okay, ad kan, as far as diphthera is concerned. The Mishnah says Chachamim Machshirim, Chachamim will validate a get that was written on the Yar Machluk or on Diftera. Frekti Gemara, Man Chachamim. Who are the Chachamim that are machshir a get that you could play around with the ksav of the get? You can erase things. And the Gemara answers, Omer Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Elazar he.